Hey everybody, let's talk about the solar eclipse coming up on the 29th of March, which is just a few days away. Okay, so I've been listening to a lot of different people just on social media and people I know personally. Just in the last couple of weeks, a lot has been going on for people with the lunar eclipse that occurred 2 weeks ago, which was quite a potent lunar eclipse, as it was a total lunar eclipse. So we are still in that energy. Solar and lunar eclipses have these windows, right, where the energy is really open for about 6 months. And that is 3 months either side of the actual date. So it's important to keep in mind that we're not just talking about an event on one day, although on a particular day where the eclipse occurs, whether it's solar or lunar, yes, of course, something specific might transpire for certain individuals, but the overall potential manifestation of whatever it will bring for us individually and collectively has quite a broad sort of window around about 6 months. And I think what adds further to that with the upcoming solar eclipse. Before I go there, let me just say a lot of people have been experiencing this lunar eclipse that just occurred 2 weeks ago in quite a difficult manner, if I can say that. A lot of people have been, yeah, just expressing and communicating difficulty, struggle. A lot of difficult things have come up for people, health-wise and otherwise as well. Of course, the lunar eclipse was in Virgo. Um, the solar eclipse, however, which is at 9 degrees of Aries, is quite unique, because in fact, it's very unique. We are really at such a powerful precipice, the day of the eclipse, right, which is at 9 degrees of Aries. So it's very important to locate Aries in your birth chart, that zone, that area, that those aspects of life are what being highlighted here. And you might want to look at the opposite house, which is Libra, okay, because the polarities in the zodiac work in tandem. They're not separate, right? So you might want to consider Aries and Libra. Um, we have the solar eclipse, in a few days' time, and the very following day, Neptune ingresses into Aries, right? Which is a big deal, right? We have not seen that in our lifetime. It is ingressing at the beginning of the zodiac, 0 degrees of Aries, which is a critical world degree, right? So there's massive, massive new doors opening for all of us. The Aries Venus star point occurred at Aries, okay, 2 degrees of Aries in the tropical zodiac, and it was in the Pisces constellation, right, in the Babylonian zodiac. So there's something, I've spoken about that already, and I've indicated that the main sort of feature around that is that, well, first of all, Venus is starting a new 8-year cycle. Venus was not going to go invisible in most parts of the northern hemisphere, northern latitudes, which makes Venus even more powerful because she doesn't dip into the underworld to purify herself, which is essentially what happens when she goes into the underworld, when she disappears out of the sky. In this case, she did not disappear. She does here in Melbourne, Australia, for us, for example. So we are having a different experience. Um, Within that context, it's also very important to reflect on what started 8 years ago and what's coming to a close in this 8-year cycle. There will be very important things coming to a close. In some cases, some people might not be very clear exactly on what that is. In some cases, for some people, it'll be extremely clear. So it just depends on you, your circumstances, life story, and so forth. But it is, I think for most people, there is an undeniable sense of many things coming to a close, chapters, doors closing, and new pathways, new doors trying to open. And we are sort of, we're at the center of that. And some of us might be caught in the past still, hanging on to things, people, situations, storylines, jobs, relationships, whatever it might be, because we have this conditioned perception, let's say, on the one hand, uh, which, conditioned perceptions which derive from the Saturn reality can sort of keep us in a state where we will will remain stagnant. We're not growing and evolving. We're not moving forward because we have this conditioned mindset. Well, I said I'd be in this for the long haul, or I said that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life, or, et cetera, et cetera. And so nothing is forever. The only thing that's certain is impermanence. That's it. So we are all of us at the moment, collectively and individually, we are all being presented with new opportunities, new doors. And what is the key component here, even with this solar Aries eclipse, Neptune entering into Aries, and then later on in the year, Saturn will enter Aries. And of course, Neptune and Saturn will form their conjunction in Aries, which I will come back and speak to later on. But we have this uh, overwhelming theme of new doorways, new chapters, new pathways, all being born, because Aries represents the birth of all things. So the common theme in all these transitions, cycles and things happening in the sky, all point to brand new beginnings. Now, if you're an Aries like me, that is actually something that's really exciting, right? Aries love new beginnings. That's their thing, right? And if you're an Aries, write it in the comments. I'd love to know and tell me if you relate to that. On the other hand, people who tend to be more, have a sort of a controlled and sort of stabilized kind of life, and want things to be sort of measured, and have this sort of long-term plan of what they thought their life was going to be, and so on and so forth. I'm thinking more earthy signs, especially. Earth signs tend to be more earth orientated and need that stability a lot more than fire and air signs do. That's just a fact. It's not a personal opinion. So some of those people there might be a little bit more resistance, right, with holding on to what we've had, what we thought our life was going to be, and resisting, these new doors that are trying to open. The resistance is going to create a problem here, because there is no holding this energy back. There is no stopping what's coming. It's coming for all of us. Now, it can come in ways where we can, integrate and work with this energy as consciously as we can, with inspiration in spirit. Aries is a fire sign. All fire signs evoke inspiration, which means being in spirit, or being enthusiastic, which comes from the Greek word entheos, which means within God or from God, right? So there's this beautiful fire, spirit, God energy birthing its way through, into these new paradigms, these new chapters, these new doorways. And we are all being asked to step in. Now, the stepping in and the choices that we make of what we leave behind or what we finish is obviously incredibly unique for every single one of us. But the common factor for all of us individually and collectively that is undeniable is that we are stepping into a new era. We are stepping into new cycles, brand new energy. And whilst we can look back historically, right, to gauge and get some sort of understanding of what these sort of cycles tend to bring up, we'll get some answers out of that for sure. But on the other hand, we have also evolved somewhat to what Neptune and Saturn meant last time they were in Aries, which would have been a really long time ago. I haven't actually checked when that was, but I suspect it would have been a super long time ago. So we're just really at a very poignant and powerful point in our own life. Now, solar eclipses are extremely powerful, generally speaking. This happens to be a partial solar eclipse. Now, partial means partial, right? Total means total. So we can gauge just from the words that because it's partial, it might not be as powerful as a total solar eclipse. On the other hand, though, Rudolf Steiner, a wonderful philosopher from, a very long time ago, who, spoke a lot about astrology in his own way, and lots of other things about spirit, consciousness, the earth, energy, spirit matter, just everything. The guy was He was a true clairvoyant, a true psychic, and he has indeed predicted, so much of what we've seen come up, especially well, probably for quite a long time, but I think in the last 5 years, everyone's eyes have been opened in a way that they were never opened before. Now, what he said about solar eclipses was that when there is a solar eclipse, whether it's partial or total, what happens is there's a release in the earth plane of dark spirits, and they are released, right? Released into and out of the earth. So it's a very intense passage when we have a solar eclipse for that reason, particularly. The whole conversation around spirits and divinities and the underworld, um, spiritual awareness, um, astral travel, uh, experiencing altered state of consciousness and having specific visions and all that stuff which is totally ruled by Neptune has it has many faces. There are many different variations and experiences of that. Some people take that path through certain pathways that induce that kind of altered state. Others find it in different ways, and everyone has a different experience. Whichever pathway you take, there are different experiences. But I guess the reason I bring that up is because we are in the midst of eclipse season, right? And because of 2025 particularly being such a profound turning point it collectively with all the shifts that are happening with the planets. We've had Pluto recently go into Aquarius. We've got Neptune about to go into Aries the day after the eclipse. Then Saturn will go into Aries. Jupiter's going to go into Cancer. Um, Uranus is going to go into Gemini. This is all happening in the space of a few months. It's quite phenomenal what is actually going on. So it's a little bit like trying to catch your tail. There's so much movement, so many changes happening, probably very, very quickly, in certain ways across the board and in certain ways individually as well. And we have to keep up with the game, as it were. I think the most important thing is that we stay totally authentic, totally aligned with what feels right for us, right? And think about Aries, this Aries energy. What does Aries correspond to? It corresponds to our instincts. It corresponds to initiating things. It corresponds to taking risks. It corresponds to having courage, right? To being honest, to being bold and courageous and, taking a step into a direction that maybe you never saw yourself going into that direction. You never thought you had the ability to do that. You never thought you had the courage to take that particular choice, to take that particular course of path. Well, all this Aries energy is creating this inspiration for all of us to potentially take these leaps forward, right? And Aries is all about moving forward and direct. And the Venus Aries star point, which just occurred around the equinox, that too is part of this picture. She is being activated, the Sun Venus conjunction, Cazimi, the Venus star, whatever you want to call it. This is happening while Venus is retrograde. This energy is being activated by this solar eclipse, by Neptune in Aries, by Saturn going into Aries later on. So there's an um, undeniable new doors opening. And it's really up to us how we choose to step into what is presented. But I think it's also important to remember with Aries, things will just drop in, right? And doors will open, and it might just happen really, really quickly. We have to be ready for that as well, Otherwise, it's like sitting there and, wishing for things to fall out of the sky and land in your lap. And life just doesn't work like that. This is the beauty that I think this is the most positive side of Aries, actually. It's that inspiration, right? That enthusiasm and that courageous warrior spirit to do things that you never thought you could, that you never thought possible. That's the beauty of this energy, which I really, really love. Let me just bring up a chart actually while I just highlight a few other things as I continue to talk about the eclipse. Okay, so this is a chart for Melbourne, Australia. So clearly, therefore, the location placement of everything is based in Melbourne. If you wanted to see where everything is, because it will change relative to your location, that is, the planets and the asteroids and points will be located in different houses in the birth chart, right? Relative to your location. But we can look at this as a chart alone. We can also look at the the ingress of the sun in Aries, right, on the 20th of March, 20th, 21st of March. That ingress chart alone, we can look at that as a standalone chart for the next 3 months, for instance. There's so many ways of looking at things, right? But if you really want to personalize it, I think in this case, especially with the solar eclipse, just take a look at where 9 degrees of Aries lands in your birth chart. That's going to be a key point. Even if you don't have things in that house, it doesn't matter. Houses that are empty do not mean that there's no activity going on there. For example, if your 10th house is empty in your chart, as this 10th house here is empty, if this was somebody's birth chart, does that mean they're not going to have a career? No, not at all. Every single house has its multiple layers and different descriptions and different experiences and manifestations. Of course, when there are things in a house, it modifies and it changes and it adds different flavors and colors and levels into things. But if there's nothing inside a house, you just go to where is the ruler of the house. In this case, it's the sun to this particular chart. So where is the sun here? Okay, it's right on the it looks like it's in the 6th house, but technically it's actually in the 5th. I'm just giving you an example. If you have the eclipse landing in your birth chart and there's nothing in your birth chart, right? Don't assume that it doesn't mean anything. Now, solar eclipses tend to have quite a quite a difficult reputation because they do bring up things that are buried in the subconscious and in the unconscious components of the ether, collectively, humanity, and within us individually. And as I said, these dark spirits tend to be floating around quite heavily, quite intensely during these times. And I guess one of the things I want to go back to that topic actually. One of the things about that to really watch, because I think we are always being initiated spiritually, whether we are aware of it or not. And the way that shows up is very different for each of us. But basically, we are offered some kind of opportunity, right? And we are also offered perhaps some kind of temptation as well. It's a little bit like the devil and the angel on the shoulders, it's like the devil's kind of leading you down that way and the angel is kind of leading you the other way, right? And it's like, whether you believe in those sorts of concepts or theories or scriptures or whatever, it doesn't really matter. What is important, and I think what we can all agree with, is that there are forces on the earth, right? And some forces are very dark and some forces are light, and that's just a fact. It's not, you can't even dispute that. All you need to do is just tune in, because it's not a rational, logical, mental explanation. It's something that we know, we sense, and then subsequently we can experience, identify, and see, right? But we have to feel it and go into it from a space outside of our left linear brain. We have to employ our right brain intuition, right? So in this field of solar eclipses, where these dark spirits and entities can be flying, circulating all over the place, which are dark forces and dark spirits are called that for a particular reason. Think about when we talk about, a lot of people use the expression the dark night of the soul, right? Now, the dark night of the soul, when people talk about that, generally speaking, it's never, ever described as something that was pleasurable or enjoyable or easy. It's usually a fucking nightmare. It's a very difficult experience, right? And it's never one night. So I don't know why they stuck to the dark night of the soul, because some people have that experience for months, days, weeks, or even years. It just depends. But it's called dark night of the soul for a particular reason, right? Think about relative to solar eclipses, again, with sort of dark spirits and entities. And the key point I want to bring up with that is when we are vulnerable, right, extremely vulnerable, whether that's physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or all of the above, the dark spirits, when they're released into the earth, We are so much more susceptible to their influence, to their temptation, to their harm. That's a fact. Think about when you are sick, for example, and I'm not talking about a life-threatening situation, just simply a really bad flu. And a really bad flu can really knock you out. You know, it can spin your head around, it can spin your astral body around. You know, you just you can't think clearly. You know, you're in pain, you're in great discomfort, you can't sleep, you know, so on and so forth, right? You are so vulnerable at that time, right? And think about when you feel the symptoms just to a flu, right? When do you feel them the most? You feel them at night. Because our defenses, our light and our defenses, light being the sun, daytime, is it's not totally obscured, right? It is in one part of the hemisphere when the sun goes down, right? And then it shines its light in another part of the hemisphere. So we experience this sense of night, right? The nighttime. The sun's light is not present. So we are open and susceptible to this different frequency, you know, different energy, the dark. And in that dark, a lot of dark things that can come up can be, you know, really difficult and very problematic and can cause great harm, especially if we are quite vulnerable. And, you know, vulnerability has, you know, a gazillion faces. Vulnerability can be experienced in so many different ways. This is not to make vulnerability wrong. Okay, let me be clear on that because vulnerability is a superpower as well. Okay, but I'm talking about a vulnerability where, let's say, your will is disengaged. You know, you feel disempowered, you feel lonely, you feel alone, you feel weak, you feel unsupported, you feel disconnected. I'm talking about that level of vulnerability where, you know, forces can really come in and really tempt you and really take you into directions that you otherwise would not want to go. A lot of this comes up during solar eclipses, which is why I'm talking about it. Um, okay, now here's some more light-hearted things to consider. The good thing about this solar eclipse, even though it has this side to it where, let me just say two things about it again. Whilst there can be these spirits around that if we are very vulnerable, as it were, in a way that's disempowering, we can be very influenced by these sorts of entities. And this is where we may have to be, you know, really spiritually attuned to what we are connecting to, what we are looking at, how we are identifying it, what we are seeing, what we are believing, what we are listening to, what we are accepting, and what we are integrating, right? All these things are really, really important. Um, and so there's kind of like it's a little bit like a spiritual initiation as well. So we have to really have um our spiritual armor on, you know, our spiritual gear. And armor is a really great word for Aries as well. Aries solar eclipse and all these energies in Aries. Look, Mercury's in Aries. Okay, Venus has now dipped back into Pisces. We'll get to that in a minute. Um, but Neptune, the subsequent day, goes into Aries. So, you know, the best of Aries is the courageous, heroic warrior. Um, and you know, Neptune in Aries can be the spiritual warrior, right? But there is that side to Aries if the person is, you know, totally unconscious and extremely self-absorbed, this becomes this conflicting, combative type of energy, you know, that has to fight with everybody and has to win. You know, Aries just has to win, 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 win. So we kind of have to watch those sorts of desires if they shall rise, you know, and sometimes it's important to think about, you know, picking your battles, you know, where do you want to really ingest and invest your energy, you know, in a futile argument or pathway or in something that's going to be conducive to promoting your life in a way that brings well-being, happiness, health, um, you know, feeling like you are um, taking a course of action that's really conducive to what you are trying to achieve, you know, for instance, right? Um, so Saturn is out of harm's way here, which is good. We need that, especially during a solar eclipse, all right? Because solar eclipse can be a bit hairy at times. They can be a bit difficult. We can't, I don't want to make it light, completely light, because a solar eclipse is basically a dark moon. There's no light. So it is that, inherently it is that, and we can't see what it's going to bring, right? But it is somewhat encouraging that I believe Jupiter is forming a sextile to this new moon solar eclipse. Um, and Jupiter is is really even in modern astrology or medieval ancient astrology, Jupiter's the good guy, Uncle Jupiter, right? He turns up and he gives us that support. He gives us that leg up, right? He presents opportunities, abundance, gifts, protection, most important, protection. Um, Inspiration, encouragement, self-belief, all these wonderful things, right? So Jupiter is forming a sextile to this solar eclipse. It's supporting, in other words, one way to think about it would be to say, okay, this solar eclipse in Aries is paving the way for these brand new doorways to open up, okay? And Jupiter is injecting via an aspect called a sextile, which fundamentally represents opportunity. So Jupiter is injecting the opportunity for us to feel confident, right? To take those choices, to open that door and take a look with courage from your heart, real courage. Aries is really about honesty as well. You've got to remember that. Some other keywords for Aries. So loads of energy. It's a fire sign, it's a masculine sign. It corresponds to initiation, action. It's the pioneer. It's acting on impulse. It's acting on instincts. Sometimes those sorts of experiences or states that lead us to opening a door, right? Or making a decision that we were fucking terrified of making for whatever reason or reasons that may be, that can be a real blessing. I can personally relate to that just in my own life, just in the last few days. I'm not going to talk about it, but I just want to say that I am an Aries. So my natural mode of operation is to be very courageous anyway. But there was some issue that I've been reflecting on for quite some time, that I was really struggling with the decision around it because of the mixed, divided information around this particular decision. So it made it very, very difficult. And this is where, once again, we have to employ our own mind, our own research, our own investigation, and we have to take risks. Because what works for you will not work for me. What works for Jane is not going to work for Joseph. It's a different script for all of us here. We all have our own script, even though we are working with the same energies, same planets, same asteroids, same stars. The soul is the unique aspect in all of this, right? So not everything works for everyone, and we cannot. It's very powerful. Knowledge is power, right? There's no question about it. So it is very powerful to be as informed as we can, right? Relative to certain decisions we may need to make. But there's this element that just requires courage from your heart, right? Just taking a fucking risk, basically, without knowing exactly what's going to happen, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. That's why it's called a risk. It's pretty funny. So Saturn is out of harm's way. Saturn is still invisible. Okay. Not visible in the sky. That's what I mean by that. So away from the solar eclipse, not in aspect to it. Okay. Invisible. So not Saturn is not harming this solar eclipse. To the contrary, Jupiter is actually injecting some of that bliss and abundance and opportunity and self-belief. When somebody is lacking in self-worth, self-belief, confidence, Jupiter is the one that will inject, those sorts of things within us. And it's injecting that energy into this solar eclipse. Okay. The other thing that's happening as well is Pluto is also forming a sextile to this solar eclipse. Now, Pluto is never an easy guy to deal with. Is the lord of the underworld. There's a million things we could say to that, but most of you that watch me do understand what Pluto is all about. So I'm not going to go into a lecture about Pluto. But just very simply, Pluto has very much to do with death and rebirth, right? It's about certain things coming to an end, closing, dying. Now, whether that's literally or symbolically, metaphorically, and new things being born. And here, Pluto is very new in the sign of Aquarius as well, okay? The best thing we can get out of Pluto is some experience of rebirth within ourselves. Rebirths don't happen. I'm talking about life-changing rebirths, right? They don't happen all the time, and they don't happen every month. I think that'd be too much for us to handle if they did. On the other hand, we sort of have a rebirth every time we wake up, but that is without effort. That's because the soul has decided to wake up again in this body. So when we go to sleep, it's kind of like we have a death and then we wake up and we have a rebirth. We don't think about that, but that's actually what's happening every day, every night. So Pluto here, again, it is a sextile. So it's a soft aspect. So it's a supportive aspect. So relative to the new doors that are opening, that Jupiter is trying to help us and support us in feeling confident to take that new direction and not worry about the future and forget about the past. It's done. We can never change the past, ever. And there's no point worrying about the future because we don't really know what it's going to be either. So what do we really have? We just have the present moment and the choices that we make in the now. So Pluto is supporting this solar eclipse in that way from the point of view of perhaps giving us, I think, if anything, what it's doing is it's adding that quality of the ability to let certain things die, because Pluto is about death and rebirth. And the transition, if you like, or the injection of Pluto into this solar eclipse is through a sextile. So it's providing an opportunity. It's supporting in some kind of way. Now, Venus is still retrograde. And so she gave birth to a new 8-year cycle on the 23rd of March, okay, as the Venus star, the Venus Aries star. That's a new 8-year cycle. Now, because she is still retrograde and because Mercury is retrograde as well, a lot of, there's so many different schools of thought. Some people really bag retrograde planets and say, it's a terrible time, it's a difficult time, it's the worst time, it's, not a good time to make decisions, etc., etc. I disagree with all of that. Yes, it can be a challenging time, that I agree with. Is it the wrong time to make a decision? Absolutely not. Why? Because when a planet is retrograde, it takes you right into yourself, your real self, the deeper aspect of yourself that's not contaminated, that's not conditioned, that's not in that fearful state of if I do this, that might happen. If I do this, then it means, I haven't stuck to my word or whatever it may be, right? There's so many psychological fears that people have, which all come from Saturn primarily. So when planets are retrograde, we go into an aspect, a part of ourselves that is not so heavily, bombarded or drained or contaminated by those sorts of thoughts and fears. So it leads us into a more pure place within ourselves where we can make a more congruent decision for what is absolutely right for us, depending on what our circumstances are. So during retrograde periods, we can absolutely change our mind, change course of action, and take new decisions. Now, relative to the new doors opening and the different choices we may make and the things closing, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. See, that's the problem. Like, people want to know, okay, so if I put this over here, the result is going to be, X, Y, Z. If I choose to open that door, I want to know what's behind that door, and I want to know where that door leads. But sometimes you've got to walk through a door where you cannot see through, which is Neptune. Aries is about risk. It's as simple as that. It's about employing that courage, just because we are in undeniable, the most powerful transitional times are occurring, really, really right now. There's more to come, there always is. And we've been through a lot. And I guess that's a good point. We've been through a lot. The last 5 years, the world has been through hell. In comparison to some other things that I've heard about darker times on the earth plane, this is mild in comparison. But, everything is relative, isn't it? It's like, even if we were around 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, whilst our soul may contain a particular memory around that, we are more in touch with, at least on that day-to-day basis, with our current experience and what we are feeling right now and what's happening in our life right now. This is what's informing how we are feeling, the choices we are making, and so forth, right? So the last 5 years has been a shitstorm for the entire world. And it has been a shitstorm. There's no other way to put it. It's destroyed so many people on so many levels, and it's still going on so many levels. And we all know that, and you all know what I'm talking about, right? That being said, we still are here. So we still have to proceed forward as best as we can. And I guess I'll end it here as well. The best thing right now that we can possibly really believe in our heart and in our soul is that there are powerful transitions going on that are unstoppable, undeniable. There are new doors opening everywhere for all of us, collectively and individually. And we are just simply being given free rein to choose which way we are going to go. At the end of the day, we do have a lot of free will, a lot. But we do also have certain aspects of life that are extremely fated, which, of course, are described by Pluto. And Bernadette Brady, indeed, does say about this solar eclipse, and this is where I will leave it. She says it's kind of, if you were to just read this little paragraph without having heard anything of what I just said now, you'd think about this and think, well, what the hell? What can I really take out of this? So perhaps you can give some thought to this in conjunction with the context of everything that I've described for this energy right now, okay? So she says, this series, Sarah series, appears to be concerned with the bringing to the surface of long-term worries about loved ones. Now, that's an important statement because that can be reflected in a billion different ways, depending on who you are and your circumstances. She says, health or issues to do with paperwork or communication. These are issues that can come up. This could manifest as a worrying piece of news about a loved one or responsibilities with paperwork coming home to roost. Any news will have a sense of destiny or fatedness about it. So that's all she says about this particular solar eclipse. I've heard her describe other eclipses in much more intense ways and much more challenging ways. Now, some of these comments she made, can go either way, right? It depends. Now, a lot of this may not resonate and may not present for a lot of people on the earth. So that's also possible. But I'm just reading it because I do feel that often what she says about eclipses, there's something there that seems to show up in some kind of way. But I think regardless of what she says there, we have to apply it in the context of everything that's happening right here, right now, which is all this Aries energy, which is just new door, new door, new door, new door. Take the risk. Have the courage to take the risk. Risk does give reward. So I'm going to leave you guys there, and I will see you very soon with whatever comes up next. I haven't really thought about that yet. By the way, if you're interested in studying with me or having a reading, just shoot me an email. I always forget to say that at the start, don't I? I notice a lot of astrologers, sell themselves in their courses for the first 5-10 minutes before they even start talking about the current astrology, weather, and so forth. And I always forget to do it. I wonder why that is. I think it's because I don't give a shit about money. But I have to survive just like you do. We all do. So anyway, wishing you all happy new beginnings, happy new beginnings, and may you have the courage to make the right choices. See you soon.